Good morning. Good morning, Grantmakers. I am Jacqueline Oselin, founder of Jackie O Holistic Wellness, and I'm delighted to be the wellness coordinator for your conference experience. Just here to remind you that we have a beautiful, restful restoration station set up for you upstairs that has been curated for you to take a pause, to rest, and to reset. So the space will be open today again from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. in room 108. So stop by and pay us a visit. And we will have our final Rise and Renew yoga class tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. in the Forest Room at the Peabody Hotel. So get up a few minutes early and come and meet us on the mat. I am also here to introduce you to your morning inspiration. Memphis's premier poetry collective, Keepin It P, will be bringing you some inspiration in just a few moments. But I'm delighted to introduce you to them because these are my sons and my daughters. And I want to bring to your attention on the keys, Jay Mitch. Give him a hand for his melodic sounds. And our host for the morning will be Frances, the Truman, and the most intentional queen of intentions herself, Sumo the artist. Let's put your hands together for Keepin It P.
It feels like a good morning to me, so I'm going to say it one more again. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's right. Time check, vibe check. Looking at the clock, it is 9:04 a.m. And we sending them good vibes for the ride. And dig this. You all are in the right flow, at the right place, at the exact right time. And know you are divine and aligned. So please, take your time with your time and just ease into the reason of your being here. This morning's poetry program is brought to you by the word of the day.
The word of the day. Can you say it for us?
Mellifluous.
Can you all say mellifluous?
That's
yes.
right.
It is an adjective describing something very sweet, almost aromatic, very kind to the ear, something you indeed want to hear. One more time, mellifluous.
Mellifluous.
Yes.
And so we've arranged a mellifluous program for you this morning. See, we've been here a history of seasons on this earth. Canvas of rock. Are you
a brushstroke of courage with a pigment of risk, a transformative hue stained, yet all you can see is the gloss varnish.
And tarnished we've become in our efforts to see what truly lies in the waters of patriarchy.
And contaminated we drink from our watered, colored fountains.
Filtered by mountains of hope, we climb the slopes of poverty that inundate us. So hey, what's the status quo?
The new education road.
Right.
A prison behind walls where minds still aren't free.
Where you gotta pay for a piece.
Stay for a lease.
And then get taught to do it all at a university. So What college y'all go to?
Alma maters, daughters and fathers,
Mothers and sons. See, this is education for the next generation.
But
What's
what is
the
the
real?
real transformation?
See, numbers and digits seem to cycle the mission.
But is it fueled by intuition?
Bruh, we so deep in student loans, it feel like we intuition.
Intuition.
Trying to lift it, but what's the weight?
When our patience
getting thinner,
patience getting sicker
from inequities and malnutrition.
When will the real education come into fruition?
Hold on, did you see that them kids was missing? Did you look
Outside the system in order to build yours from within? A true win for win, all for the love of mankind. Grounding into this numinous spirit as we cross these battle lines.
And these battle lines between education and civil rights left our leaders in museums and movies. See, how do you keep the P empowered when philanthropy meets casualty? What's your position when vision is encrypted? Access to justice coded by tactics and conviction. See, practice is molded by the hands that transition clay to form.
Changing norms
and raging storms in deserts of diversity. So tell me,
how do you?
Can you tell me?
How do you
keep the P in philanthropy? And that's that peace. Poetry snaps for the peace.
The philanthropy,
Yes, yes. And so we are keeping it P. And the P is for poetry, of course. For our poetic provisions, one more time, we got J. Mitch Stay Lit, keeping the P in piano this morning. Poetry snaps for the keys. And then one half of this dynamic duo, our vibrant vocalist, the most intentional queen of intentions, Sumo the artist. Yes, 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 poetry snaps. And lastly, I'm Francis, comma, the Truman, asking how you doing. If y'all feeling blessed this morning, say yeah. I like that, I like that, I like that.
Y'all feel real blessed.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Well, you can find and subscribe to us at keepinitp.com. We Keepin It P on IG. If you're on TikTok, because I know y'all are.
TikTok.
We _ Keepin It P. We host poetry open mics around the city, workshops, and live performances such as this. So
programming and everything.
Absolutely.
And if you guys happen to be in Memphis on Monday night, we do have our last season closer of a poetry open mic, and we would love to invite you all out. So let us know.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Peace.
Stay philanthropic.
Thank you. I feel like this is a collective breath we all need to take together, and I feel like maybe especially now before this conversation. But good morning, everybody. How are y'all today? Here. I hope you had fun last night. For those of you who were here with us yesterday out on Beale Street, it was really quite a time. And for those of you who are just joining us today, you missed an incredible day yesterday, so I encourage you to come from the beginning next time, but also welcome. We are going to jump right in, and we're going to take up the question that Francis, J. Mitch, Sumo, and Taylor just left us with, which is, what's the real transformation? And to consider that question from a place of integrity, principle, anchored in our values, but maybe especially when we're feeling under pressure. We're going to continue to posit some insights for transformation about how education and learning is being transformed and to what end, and the nature and purpose of philanthropy's leadership. Remember that what we're doing here is we're sharpening our thinking about what transformative philanthropy looks like, feels like, sounds like for an affirmative vision for education. So, beside me here this morning are two fierce advocates brilliant strategists, coalition builders, visionary leaders, and so much more, Skye Perryman and Dr. Rashawn Ray. Both bring deep expertise and bold, innovative thinking to some of the most urgent challenges of our time. Skye is president and CEO of Democracy Forward. And this is my claps. A legal organization that uses the power of the law to build a more just and inclusive democracy. Nationally respected attorney and strategist, Skye has led groundbreaking efforts to challenge abuses of power, protect reproductive rights, and ensure that our public institutions serve the people they were created for. Dr. Rashawn Ray is executive director of the AIR Opportunity Fund, your colleague, and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, leading sociologist and public scholar. Dr. Ray's research confronts systemic inequities and translates data into real-world change. His work ensures that research isn't just published, but it's put into action. And together, they remind us that defending democracy, our individual and collective rights, and advancing justice requires not only courage and conviction, but also collaboration, insight, and impact. So I invite each of you to draw on their deep expertise and their very expansive lines of sight into your own sense-making, and as you explore ways to continue rolling up your sleeves into action, including but beyond the grant. So please join me in welcoming Skye and Rashawn. Here's how this is going to work this morning. I've got a few questions just to get the conversation going, and then we're going to open it up to your conversations. I'll say now that there are 2 mic stands that have mics. Yes, I can see. And I will let you know when to start thinking about or forming your questions if you want to ask, but we'll have plenty of time, or try to have plenty of time to include each of you in the conversations as well. What we don't get through today, you can continue on. And then we'll close out our plenary and continue on with the rest of the day. So that's how this morning will work. But let me start with you, Skye. Democracy Forward uses the law to build collective power and advance a bold, vibrant democracy for all people. Many here are likely familiar with the work, your work, and the work of Democracy Forward and your team, and the many partners that you have. The mission-driven work that you're doing, though, is not new, though we may see more of you on our TV screens and in different spaces. But it's not a function of a necessarily kind of the new governance structure or political arrangements. So if you could do us a favor and just kind of set some of that background stage, reflecting on the 10, 20, 30 years of the work of like what it means to actually advance and build a bold, vibrant democracy. And what's the state of our democracy here?
Well, thank you for having me, and it is amazing to get to also be on stage with Rashawn, who I so admire, and it's great to see all of you. You all know this because you live it and you teach it and you support it, but this country was founded on an idea that we have never truly achieved. And so we have been on a road of trying to achieve true democracy, a society that can hold all of us in this room, which our first, early years of the country wasn't set up to hold all of us, right? And so that's been the work of the American people, of social movements. Justice has not been handed down from any court or any institution. Justice has been hard fought. Where we have seen progress, that has been a result of people having to step out, having to take risk. Ordinary people living in extraordinary times means that ordinary people do extraordinary things. And that has been, I think, that has been the story of this country since its founding, and certainly through the 20th century and the 21st century. What we have seen, however, is the question, that's the urgent question: will we ever be able to achieve a true, vibrant, bold democracy that is built for all people? The question has often been, how do we move forward? And over the past few years, that question has also now been met with, are we sliding backwards, right? That's not to say that we have a perfect thing to preserve. We've got a lot of work to do to move forward. But in 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies. I'm going to say that again. In 2021, the United States was added to the list of global backsliding democracies, and it was not the attempt of the current president to overturn an election, and it was not the violent insurrection on January 6th that landed us on that list. It was that event that got international researchers checking their own bias to say, well, what's going on in the United States? But when they went back and looked, what they saw was that for a period of years, we had seen rising disinformation and misinformation, a Supreme Court that in many instances is reversing the rights of people, such as in 2013 with the Shelby versus Holder voting rights decision, as opposed to protecting people's rights, extremism at the state level, and a dysfunctional legislative branch. You have something like January 6th happen in this country, and our elected leaders didn't do anything to prevent it from happening again. And so all of that landed us on this list, and we remained on that list ever since. And so the question last year, or the question this year, was not whether we were going to be able to propel ourselves in some instantaneous way to the bold and vibrant democracy that all of us are working to achieve and want to live in, but whether that backslide was going to slow and potentially be able to turn around with a lot of work from all of us, or whether it was going to accelerate. And what we have seen since the inauguration, unfortunately, is an acceleration of that democratic backslide. So when we talk about backsliding democracies, we're not making excuses for the state of where we were prior to the backslide. We still have a bunch of work to do to achieve that bold and vibrant democracy, but we're talking about the need now to both stop the backslide and be able to use what is a crisis as a catalyst to move beyond where this country has ever been, right? To be able to really achieve that democracy for all people. So I think, I do believe the state of democracy that we are in now is in crisis. We are working every day, though, not just to stop the bleeding, so to speak, or to slow the crisis, but working every day to figure out how we can use the crisis that we are in as a catalyst to propel us forward in a way that perhaps this country has never truly achieved and imagined.
And so, bringing against that backdrop then, share your analysis with us then on what you see as the most salient challenges and wins around education and learning, early childhood, K-12, higher ed, and beyond in the last year and today. And if you could kind of extend that with not just the what, but what you see as the driving why. Is this consolidation of power? Is this navigation of knowledge? Is this resetting? What is the why that you see behind this?
So while we're in a crisis, there have been some wins, and there are wins that we really need to, in this room, I think, focus on. Let's start with the fact that many powerful institutions, including institutions of higher education and institutions that support other educational initiatives, have not necessarily been stepping up to the plate in the way that in an ideal world we would want them to. Some have, some haven't, but we have seen powerful institutions struggle in this moment and not push back as much as maybe we would hope. However, we have seen the people that are affected have pushed forward. There have been over 500 federal court actions filed in the last 250 days. And in those actions, and I will get to how they affect education, people and communities in this country that are going to court are winning 80 and 85 and at times 90% of the time against judges that were appointed by Republicans, Democrats, and President Trump himself. People are stepping forward as institutions have been stepping back. And they are using the levers of power that they have, whether it is being millions on the streets that you saw last week, or whether it is using the levers of power they have, such as initiating litigation against their government. In the education space, that effort has been able to produce the Dear Colleague letter that you all are aware of that would have deprived educational institutions of funding if they did not agree with the president's take on the Students for Fair Admissions decision and his view of civil rights. We have blocked that. It was blocked by a judge that President Trump himself appointed, And there are 2 other cases that also led to court orders blocking that. It was not the most powerful institutions that brought those cases. It was organizations of teachers, labor unions. It was the people that stood up and brought those cases. We have secured the first federal court acknowledgement that the president's crusade against diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, it is not just a crusade against our civil rights. It is a crusade against the First Amendment. And we've seen federal courts start understanding that. You can't have a government that prevents people from expressing or learning particular ideas. In the United States, there is no king. That was the first sentence of the early complaint that challenged that crusade against diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility that led to the first federal court acknowledging the First Amendment concerns with this crusade. And that is better legal principles and reasoning than we have seen in the past few years on the issue of civil rights, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So when we talk about this crisis and this overreach, we're going to be able to see some wins and to reframe what is happening in the reframing. We have blocked the decimation of the Department of Education only to have the Supreme Court, without any explanation, put a pause on that block. But the court has not said that what the president has done is lawful, and we're continuing to vigorously litigate these cases. And then, of course, at the state level, we continue to see people and communities stepping up to protect their libraries, to protect their schools, to protect public education funding. And then, of course, we were able to secure because of people. Again, not because of powerful institutions, but because of people. We were able to secure this over $6 billion of education funding that the president was withholding that are now within the systems today. That is a victory that the Supreme Court, that nobody can take away now, because that money is out there and flowing. And so I would just say that my call in this moment is for us to understand where we are. We're in a very scary moment. Understand that there's not going to be a way out of this moment without some discomfort. It's not going to be comfortable for anybody. And as a result of that, we actually have the freedom to choose what we are going to do with this moment. And what we have seen is that as institutions have pulled back, people have stepped forward. The last thing I will say is, in the legal profession itself has also been in its own crisis. The education profession's in its own crisis. The legal profession's been in its own crisis. And what we have seen in the last 250 days of this administration has been the largest and most successful legal effort against an executive branch that is harming people in United States history. And that has all been accomplished without the level and nature of support from large private law firms that the pro-democracy community has often been able to rely on. And so that's another example of where some institutions have a question about what this moment requires, but the people have not. And we are really trying to take the courage that we're seeing from people and catalyze that and figure out how we can use that, not just to create change today, but to really do the building for tomorrow.
Thanks. So Rashawn, let's extend this and talk about the courage of the people that you all are working with, both on your team and the folks the organizations that you fund and the folks that they serve. What are you seeing as kind of the up and down streams of the type of challenges and wins that Skye is talking about, and how is that playing out in the work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, well, again, similar to what Skye said, thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here. It's great to be up here with you, Skye. It's great to see all of you. As we talked about before, I'm from Memphis, and I'll center that a bit later. I went to college here. I'm originally from Middle Tennessee. I think about this place and what it means, and when we think about schools, oftentimes schools, it could be argued, are some of the most local ways in which we think about the way that communities come together. And when I think about that and the work that we're doing at the AIR Opportunity Fund, which is a 10-year, $225 million investment to address systemic inequalities in local communities. And we do that by partnering with community-based organizations. We ventured on a place-based initiative to identify the most underserved communities in the country, the most marginalized communities, and we are now going deep into those places, similar to what we're doing in the Delta region with the NEA Foundation in schools throughout the Delta, or kind of what we call Delta Plus is kind of extended in some places. But the biggest thing that we've learned is after we identified those places, we then conducted listening sessions in all of those places. And over 400 community-based organizations showed up, over 400. And one of the biggest takeaways from that is in this moment, I live in the DC area, that while the DC region has been hard hit and people are scrambling around, people are just running around trying to figure out what's going on. You know who's not doing that? The people in these most marginalized communities. You know why? Because they are prepared for this period. We are no longer in a moment, we are in a period. And Skye and I, we were talking about that earlier, and we have to figure out what it means to kind of ride this wave where we are. But part of thinking about that is that these community-based organizations are most prepared because this is their everyday reality. And every time that we step into a meeting, or we step on Zoom, or we step on Teams, and we act timid about a word that we use, or we act timid about something that's going on, we have to center the people who can't have the luxury to be on those calls that we're on, who don't have the ability to be in this room and eat great food and wear nice clothes and talk to great people. We have to center them. And in doing so, that is the courage that I take and the courage that my team has. Because when we interact with people in community-based organizations, oftentimes these are grassroots organizations that came about because something was happening in their local community that they wanted changed. They are not trained the way that we are, but they have a lived experience that oftentimes cannot be matched by us. And I think we center that. But I think in this room, I just want to encourage us to be courageous. Because part of what I hear from funders, part of what I hear from practitioners, from researchers, is how difficult it is. Oh, we lost a grant or something like that happened. Sure. The first Trump administration, I was building my research center at the University of Maryland, where I've been a professor for the past 15 years. And we had probably $3 million in federal and state grants, which was really big for our shop in the Department of Sociology. All of them went away almost overnight. What were we going to do? I'd employed all of these people, staff members, students, all of this. We pivoted. And part of what we have to do right now is pivot. Part of my pivot was starting to work with corporations, leaning into this virtual reality training program that we were developing for law enforcement. And so we have to pivot in this moment. And I think what that looks like for us when we think about the successes is the ability to collaborate. I've seen funders come together in ways that we haven't before because we can get pretty balkanized, right? Like it's like, no, I wanna own this work. That is not the time for that. We need to be collaborating across the board, connecting with people. We've seen that. We need to center the people who are most marginalized because oftentimes they have the answers. And part of what our funding can do is actually get them together. When I think about some of the work that's happening in Chicago, it's similar to some of the work that's happening in Little Rock. It's similar to some of the work that's happening in Phoenix and some of the work that's happening in Detroit. We need to be able to convene those individuals. So one suggestion I would have, and what we try to do is as we build out convenings and as we bring people together, we really aim to bring on our community-based organizations. As funders, we can do things like put in the budget the things that we know they need. And I think that's important to do because oftentimes they don't know. We can also pair them up with researchers to take the pressure off of them in terms of how they apply for grants. That's a big thing we've noticed. These community-based organizations know what they're doing. They don't always know how to write a 50-page proposal. Yeah. And we shouldn't expect for them to. But we can give them the resources and connect them with people who can help them do that. Yeah. And so I think that there are different ways that we need to go about our work. The final thing I'll say is when we center local and we center community-based organizations, and part of the reason why I'm saying it is because when we go back to when Obama was elected, part of what Republicans did, and it wasn't just Republicans, it was actually far-right extremists and conservatives, and we need to be specific about that. There are differences between political party and political ideology, and it's important that we make that distinction. But they started building a far-right farm team. They started building a far-right farm team, and they started that over 15 years ago, and that is what we have today. While we were kind of having our savior complex, looking at someone from a particular side to come and save America, they were building a farm team that allowed them to respond today. And that is why they are best positioned. The other thing they've done is they have also controlled algorithms and taken away oftentimes people's ability to mobilize on social media like we saw at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement a decade ago. And we have now entered a digital dictatorship where not only are they controlling our bodies, but they are also controlling our minds. And we really need to pay attention to that with young people in schools. So it's not just about taking away their phones as a parent of 2 teenagers, as much as I want to take away their phone and I limit TikTok and Instagram. No, you got an hour after you finish your homework. Outside of all of that, what we need to realize is the way that the algorithms are shifting to give them content that actually mutes and limits their ability to critically analyze things.
Yes.
And we need to think about that. It's not just about taking something away from them. It's about figuring out ways in which we utilize that technology to help them in and around schools.
Thank you. So as y'all are sitting on all of this and thinking about perhaps a question or two that you might have, one last question, Skye, before we open it up.
Sure.
About the Supreme Court. So the 2025 term began earlier this month, and we're talking about kind of people, but the court helps set the conditions in which we all kind of operate and exist. This calendar does include cases that we should be paying attention to. So if you could share, which are those in your opinion, why we should care about those cases, and pay attention. And then, are there any cases that the court has declined to hear that we should be aware of and kind of keep tabs on in some way?
That's a great question. Let me just make sure we are orienting ourselves. I'm sure this goes without saying, but I've been doing this a bit because people and the anxiety around the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, if you look at all of U.S. history, but for a few decades in the last century, and a smattering, and I do mean a smattering, of decisions in this century, the United States Supreme Court has not been an institution that has been handing down or delivering decisions that are expanding the rights of people. And I just want to make sure that we're grounding ourselves in that. When we think about the Supreme Court, and this is why I became a lawyer, we think about Brown versus Board. We think about voting rights decisions. We think about a very particular moment of time in U.S. history that was a very motivational moment and is an aspirational moment for the court. But that is not the court that we have seen if you look at the whole of U.S. history, but for those decades and then a smattering of wins in the 21st century. So I just want to ground when we talk about the Supreme Court. When you think about the people that were lawyering on behalf of the very communities that we're lawyering on behalf of today, that have been doing this for some time, they were never going to court thinking that they had 5 votes locked up at the Supreme Court. That was never in a calculus. That was not in the calculus of the people that funded the litigation to the extent they could get funding for it. They often could not. And it was not in the calculus of the lawyers that were litigating it, and it certainly wasn't in the calculus of the communities. And in fact, a reporter asked me the other day, well, look at these civil rights cases, they're talking about, those are offensive cases, and you're on defense. And he goes, is it harder to be on offense or defense? And I said, I don't think people that were trying to open the doors of schools and protect children from being bombed in churches in the South thought they were going on offense. I think that we've always been fighting for dear life in many of those instances, and that is what we see today. So I just like to orient discussions about the Supreme Court that when we talk about using the law, we are not just talking about winning some Supreme Court decision that we all hope we're going to win, that will open the doors of government, that will make things better. That is obviously one thing we want to do, but that is never what this has been. It is about the power of people in this country to initiate litigation against their government and to say, I have something under this Constitution that they are taking away, and I am here, and I am going to force a public conversation about my rights. And whether that was Mr. Scott suing for his freedom, or whether that were many school students that sued prior to Brown, that is always what this work has been about. So now we have a Supreme Court that is we are in a very concerning time with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, and it's not so much what is on its merits docket, and I'll talk about the merits docket. It is really the Supreme Court's new, sort of new trend, which really started in the first Trump administration, of enabling the administration, the Trump administration, and then it did happen it happened in sort of reverse in the Biden administration. Now it's back where the Department of Justice is the one, but it is the Supreme Court's willingness to enable the far-right legal movement, whether those are lawyers of the Department of Justice, which is what we're seeing now, or whether it is special interest groups, which is what we saw a few years ago, go up to the Supreme Court very quickly on an emergency docket without hearing all of the facts, without looking at what the lower courts have found, and asking for emergency rulings that the court itself is not even explaining what it means. So that is what we call, when we talk about the shadow docket, we're talking about an emergency docket. And that is something we all need to be looking at and concerned with. Among the many cases that Democracy Forward has brought and won, including the case preventing the decimation of the Department of Education, the case protecting your social security data and your personal information from DOJ, the case that prevented government-wide indiscriminate terminations without any analysis at all. We won all of those cases. They were sustained on appeal, and the Supreme Court, without explanation, has paused those court orders. Now, we're going to continue to vigorously litigate, but you're going to see that happening more and more. Yep. And that's a place where there's work that needs to be supported to bring cases, but also to have people raising awareness about that. So that's one thing to watch, is not even what is on this published docket, but what is on the merits docket. Now, or the shadow docket. What I will say about the shadow docket, and we'll get in the merits docket. On the shadow docket, one of the pieces of the strategy that we're empowering communities to use to defend their rights in this time is a volume strategy. This administration, unfortunately, has made a decision to govern at such a speed and at such a high volume where they are really running roughshod over the rights of people on a near daily basis. And that requires a near daily legal response. Within that lies some really good opportunity, because not all of those cases can reach the Supreme Court even on the emergency docket. And we are securing wins every day, including, by the way, the national funding freeze remains blocked. I mean, a number of major wins that are affecting and positively affecting communities we are securing every day. And those cases are not going to the Supreme Court in this expedited fashion. And so that's part of the new way of thinking. We need to make sure that philanthropy and that legal organizations and civil society are really understanding this is just as much of a volume need as it is a strategic need, because so much of this is making sure people can get their rights defended, communities can get what they need. And if you bring it in a high volume, it's less likely that everything can go up to the Supreme Court. We are securing concessions right now from the government almost every week. We're just suing the government and going in. The administration is backing off because they cannot defend their actions legally, and because they're resource strapped. So that is going to be part of what we have to do, not just in the first 250 days, but over this longer term fight. Mm-hmm. At the court itself, I mean, look, you've seen the coverage about there's a voting, there's redistricting and voting rights, or districting and voting rights that are on the docket. There are a range of cases that affect the rights of trans people, the ability of state governments to protect against misinformation and disinformation that are targeting trans or LGBTQ communities. So those cases are on the docket. We will see a range of cases. Birthright citizenship, of course, the court is looking at whether to take that more on the merits. We will see a range of cases that the court has not announced that it will take on its merits docket about what the Trump administration is doing. And so I think, there's a whole lot on that docket. We have a people's guide to the Supreme Court that you can access on our website at democracyforward.org if you want a rundown of all of the cases. But what we're trying to make sure rooms like this understand is that hand-wringing about what might happen at the Supreme Court is not actually going to create the kind of change that we need in this moment. And what we need to do is to empower people to use all the levers of power they have. That includes initiating litigation, it includes peacefully protesting, it includes building communities and building programs. We need to do that in a high volume, and we need to have a humility about what these institutions actually have done in throughout U.S. history, and what has been the change that we've seen. It has come from people, and it has come from people pushing on doors that they thought were closed to them, and pushing and pushing and pushing, and then someday it opens. And it's not just because of that one little push the day it opens. It's because you've been breaking it down. And that's the community we need to build and the work we need to be supporting. And so that's how we're looking at this Supreme Court term.
Questions? Yep, jump on.
I am much too short for this. So first of all, thank you, and I'm actually here to present work that was supported in part by the AIR Opportunity Fund, so thank you for that. I'm interested in hearing more about this move to research work in partnership with local communities, because I think that there are two streams of that right now. There are some people who are saying it's time to do the most authentic work with the most impacted communities, and there are some people who are saying, I've given up on national policy. Let me just compromise, scale down, and just work locally. And that's a very different narrative about local partnerships, and I'm wondering how you think about making it the first rather than the second, and also making that authentic work connected to national policy efforts.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think that those two different perspectives on the narrative kind of exist based on where people are coming from. The way that I think about it, though, is the outcome ultimately the same? And in some cases, it could be, which is centering people locally. I mean, on one hand, people are correct that federally, when we currently look at the federal landscape, and even when we look at states, this goes back to what I was saying about building the farm team. When you look across the control of state legislatures, it completely leans one way versus the other. And even the ones that lean blue oftentimes don't have the courage to do what they want to do. So for example, I'll throw out two. In Maryland and California, and I worked on both of these legislations, Maryland and California this year both brought up reparations bills, legislations that the state legislature passed. The governors vetoed them. Who are those governors? Governor Moore and Governor Newsom, two people who will probably end up running for president at some point in some way. Why wouldn't they have the courage to do that? Well, the people at their tabletops and who are talking to them tell them that they won't be able to compete on a national stage. I think we have to back up against that narrative, but I think that's where part of that narrative comes from. I think comparatively, going local means that we are building up the next group of policymakers, the next group of PhDs, the next group of practitioners, the next group of people who are running foundations by us being there. See, part of what we have to think about is when we're in these communities and when we're supporting these communities, we are also modeling what they need to look like for the next generation. So part of thinking through that is us being in those local communities matter. But what we have to do is link our work to actually use evidence for action to create policy change. And I think that exists on the local, state, and federal level. One thing that Senator Cory Booker always says is that change doesn't come from Washington, change comes to Washington. And part of that change coming to Washington starts locally. So I think that we center that and we end up being in a place where the action can happen and be the same, while we are also shifting the narrative about the importance of why we go locally, not just saying that we're giving up on the national landscape or what's happening in states, but I do think that we can be very strategic in how we approach all of those actions. And again, just my final point on that, things coming to Washington. If we look at something simple that probably should have happened decades ago, the Juneteenth holiday. When that was passed under the Biden administration, it wasn't just because the Biden administration was like, we need to do this. About 20 or 30 states or more had already passed it in the states. It made it easy. It was a slam dunk. Senators were like, yeah, I'm not going to say no to this. So doing things locally actually scales up, and I think we can get to the same behavior.
The only thing I would add to that, and I think it's important in this room as we're thinking about transformative philanthropy and transformative work, is that we do need to stiffen our backs a little bit, and that's just to say, and it's a point that Rashawn made, the far right built its power when it, in backlash to the progress that pro-democracy, pro-public education, pro-equity advocates were realizing. Brown was a threat to people that want to keep this society only for some and not for all. Massive legislative initiatives like the Voting Rights Act, that becomes a threat to people that want to hold the privilege of this nation for only some and not for all. And we can go on and on and on about some of the advances in the later part of the 20th century and the early 21st century that represented a threat. When the far right walks into cultural spaces, whether it's a coffee shop or a grocery store, and they see people celebrating Black History Month or LGBTQ Pride or Hispanic Heritage Month, right? These are things that are a threat to a worldview, that wants to keep this nation smaller than it should be. And so they built their power when they felt like they were totally out of power. And so the one thing that I would just say, this happened after Dobbs, a bunch of philanthropic institutions said, like, we're just done with the courts.
Yeah.
Well, that's not actually, they started building for the courts they wanted to see 30 years from now in that time. Or they, now we have a massive crisis at the federal level and some state level. We're just done with that. No, this is actually the time to build that farm team. And so I hope that that's one thing that you all and that we all can take with us from this gathering is crisis can become a catalyst, and it's our time to not waste this crisis to build the catalyst for something that we've never seen, never achieved, and that will make our society so much better and so many people's communities better.
So thank you. One last question, and we'll be quick with the responses before we have a chance to just offer some final remarks. There's never enough time, we know this, thank you. But go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, so Kimberly Robinson from the Education Rights Institute. So the question I have actually builds well off the last comment, which is, what is the vision, the alternative vision that we're putting forth that we're all sort of running toward? In other words, the right has really done a great job of putting forth a vision of what they want and the world they want to create. But it seems like the left, there's less of a vision of the key elements that we're seeking to build towards. So I would love to hear you all comment on what is that, what are the elements of that vision? What does it look like? And how are we conveying that in a way that is capturing people's imagination so that they will sort of write down the vision and they will run toward it, right? And so what is that vision that we are building toward, rather than just obviously trying to defend and rebuild what was there, because there was so much that was broken in what was happening already. And so simply rebuilding it, obviously, we need to keep the rights that we have, but yeah, we don't need to rebuild a system that was already deeply broken and inequitable. Thanks.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I would just say, I think what we see uniting people in this moment, you saw it with the millions of people on the streets last weekend, but we see it in our court filings, which, by the way, are being filed by many unusual allies and, people that don't always get along. People want a nation where their kids have a better life than they had, right? A country that respects everyone, where you can thrive and build your life. And I think the right has done a good job in messaging out of fear, and sometimes that gets mistaken for a vision. They actually had to run away from their vision. Project 2025, which was such a political hot potato and so unpopular even among conservatives, that the president and his associates on the campaign trail would not even say they were going to do it, right? So I do think that one of the things that the far right has done is they found ways to message, and their message is often based in fear, and it is based in trying to deny a common humanity. It's trying to pick apart communities that are far more aligned on things than maybe the messaging would have you think. In this last election, Deep Red Missouri passed a ballot initiative to protect reproductive rights. In the state of Florida, that same ballot initiative got more votes in the state of Florida than Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. In places where this has always been seen that like reproductive rights might have been a real political hot potato, we actually see some unity on the issues. People from liberals to conservatives to moderates were all against Project 2025. It's why no one would own it in the election cycle. And so I think that they have done a good job of finding ways to message and to message out of fear, and that sometimes gets mistaken for a vision. And of course, the pithy phrase, "Make America Great Again," I mean, those are messaging tactics, but we've not seen a real vision that is motivating for people even out of that movement. It's all stoked in fear, and so part of what we have to do is not take the bait, and don't don't just create our own message out of the fear of this moment, but out of what it can be. And what we're seeing is people they want to live in safe communities. They want, a future for their kids that are better than the life they had or the lives that the grandparents have. These are common things, and they're uniting people in this time because of the overreach that we're seeing in a way that if we can catalyze it, it can truly build a new movement, I think, with this vision. So that's sort of my take on it. But you have a vibrant, bold vision.
I agree. Look, I think it's fairly simple and straightforward. Equity is still the vision. True democracy is still the vision. We are in a democratic experiment. It has not been fulfilled by any means, and I think part of what we're doing with this conversation, part of what's happening with this conference, it's a three-part process that I think about. We are all becoming racial equity learners. We are learning about how to think and talk about it. And then we have to transform that into advocacy, which oftentimes deals in the conversations that we have. And then we have to become racial equity brokers, which is what she's doing and which is just next level. The brokerage and thinking about policies and thinking about rules and procedures and laws is how to think about it. As I mentioned before, I went to college at University of Memphis, down the road. And I remember every year on MLK holiday, with my fraternity, but even before, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, we would go from the slave auction block downtown, which is not too far, and then we would march to the National Civil Rights Museum where MLK was assassinated at. And then on the way back to campus, when we would be very hyped up about thinking about what it means to try to make change and what we're going to do in our lives, we would pass Nathan Bedford Forrest's statue going back to campus and be like, where the heck are we at and what does this look like? And one thing that a lot of people don't know, the most Confederate statues popped up during the Civil Rights Movement. Why was that? Because Brown was a threat. Why was that? Because civil rights was a threat. They were trying to make people fearful. And what we have to be in this moment is fearless. Those are two different things. And part of doing that is to recognize that we have to be courageous, we have to be bold, we have to pivot, and we have to move faster. If you got a 5-year strategic plan and you didn't have what just happens now on your docket, change it. Do something different. Don't just stick to that saying, we're just going to keep going on like things are normal because I can go get my fancy latte and hop on my team's meeting. No, actually think about the people who are dealing with that and don't have paralysis by fear and actually be bold. And so what I encourage you all to do is to put your money where your mission is and use your funding to preserve the democracy that people died for, and then help build a future that students in educational settings want to dream and live in. That is the vision. Thank you all.
Join me in thanking Skye and Rashawn for being with us this morning, for the many, many gems, and for your fierce fights all day, every day. Before we leave, and thank you all for your couple of extra minutes, I want to introduce, you could come on, Anthony Simmons. He is new to our team, but not new to many of y'all, a friend and colleague to many. But I figure since we're a little bit tight on time and it'll take us a moment to get off the stage, that will end by turning it to you, Tony.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Skye, and thank you, Rashawn. I think you've lit a necessary fire in folks as they move forward. If anyone knows me, I have a lot to say all the time, but I'm going to keep this brief. Skye, you talked about using the crisis as a catalyst, and it got me thinking. And so I went because I needed to remind myself what the mission and purpose was of the crisis publication from the NAACP. So I'd like to read this to you. Mission: to set truth those facts and arguments which highlight racism and champion the rights of people of color and the ideals of American democracy. It was 1910. Right. So we have come a long way, and yet we still have a long way to go. So be courageous to convene, be courageous to reflect with others, Be courageous to share your power. You cannot do this alone, because I think we are all realizing that we are all in this together. That's the point. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your morning, and we'll see you back here for lunch.
All right, I'm running.
Yes.